maybe with my functional manager. Sub-teams will naturally form. Some of you have seen this when you put a large group together and you give them an assignment. Sub-teams naturally form. That's our natural response to that environment. There's just too many connecting points for us to maintain, so we try to maintain our sanity by congregating around small groups that work together. The third consideration for smaller has to do with productivity. Now, what does productivity mean anyway? Productivity means different things to different people, and we could debate how we might define that, but I want to point to research done by Lawrence Putnam. Lawrence Putnam decided that when he was measuring productivity, he was going to use lines of code. Now again, we can debate whether that's the best measurement or not, but he measured enough teams that we could gain some statistical understanding of what goes on when team sizes change balanced against the number of lines of code that they produce. He looked at 500 projects with an average of 57,000 lines of code. And the variance was pretty tight. Only about 3,000 lines of code difference across projects. So they were all pretty tight within that range. He looked at the team sizes that were scattered across those 500 projects, and he put team sizes into 5 categories. He then measured how much effort was expended, and he measured the schedule. Now, before I share with you the results of his finding, I want to read you this quote that Putnam shares with us. He says, "The development effort statistics show that larger teams translate into more effort and cost." Well, yeah, that makes sense. I would expect that. "The trend, however, appears to have an exponential behavior. The most cost-effective strategy is the smallest team. However, there's an extreme non-linear effort increase over time." And I'm sorry about this, but there's some interference and it keeps jumping ahead. So yeah. I ask for your understanding as I'm flipping around here. "Once we get towards 9 or more people, things change." So here's the results of his work. Now, I extrapolated this. You can go to the website, if you search for Putnam and that article, you'll be able to find some of this stuff. But here's his categories of team size. 1.5 to 3 people, 3 to 5 people, 5 to 7, 9 to 11, 15 to 20. The blue over here represents the schedule. How long did it take to get things delivered? The red represents how much effort was reported. And I would expect to be a difference, right? So this is the difference between effort and schedule, right? It might have consumed about 5 months of effort in terms of staff months. Gosh, sorry.
Just ignore it.
But it might take 3 times longer than that to get the work delivered. Right? Okay, then he looked at teams that had the same size project, but now team size a little bit bigger. And you could see, well, yeah, I would expect that the effort would go up. But now the schedule is getting a little better. Maybe not as much better as I'd like it to see, but it is getting a little better. 5 to 7. All right. Well, the schedule doesn't change a whole lot, but the total amount of effort that we're expending is going down. But now let's look at the next 2 team sizes. Yeah, schedule's getting better, but the amount of effort now is out of whack. It's skewed up. And for that last group, yeah, and look at the schedule. The schedule's actually a little bit worse against all that effort. So this idea of throwing more people at it, what's that term? Is it crashing? That's like a, right? Sometimes it'll help. If you start getting into large sizes, you might actually be making things worse. So why? Why do we think this is happening? So Putnam gives us some suggestions to consider. Common sense reasoning. Right? So with all the statistical guidance, he still has to apply some common sense. The team size provides some protection. So if someone's missing, they can recover from that. Individual performance is not overcome by group dynamics. When you have so many people, it's very easy to get lost there. Team size is probably close to optimum. Bear with me. In building motivation and cohesion, minimum human communication complexity, and doesn't require a lot of mental overhead. Now, these are things that even if I didn't show you the statistics, many of you have experienced this, and you would be able to nod your heads and say, yeah, I've seen that myself. Okay, so back to this picture. Small, cross-functional, self-managing. We already talked about small. Let's talk about cross-functionality. Two types of cross-functionality. There's team cross-functionality and there's individual cross-functionality. Starting with individual cross-functionality. Some of you have seen the T model of evaluating people's skills. HR sometimes uses this. What they do is they gain an understanding of what are individuals' primary skills and what are their secondary skills. So in this example, this person is really strong in Java. Great depth in that skill. They got a respectable amount of depth in HTML. They can hold their own and have to do something there. A little bit of database work, not a whole lot. Some documentation, they don't write that well, but if they were pressed, they could probably help out. Some QA testing. QA testing, I'm not talking about regular unit testing, I'm talking about standards that as an industry, as a profession, QA upholds. So in this model, we recognize, yeah, this is that person's strength, but they have other skills. Why might that be important for us to understand? Well, if I've got a willingness from the individual and from the organization to allow this person to get involved in some of these other areas, it could change the way we work. Now, some of you are sitting by yourself. If you are, you're going to lean over to someone next to you. And you're going to ask each other this question. So if you want an interview right now and someone asks you, do you know your primary workplace skill? What would you say? In that T model, what would be the one that is the deepest? And then, where'd you grow up? Go ahead and do that, please. Take a minute.
Chaos control. I would say
good? Yeah. Doing all right?
Whether you had a chance to think about this beforehand or not, you might have more than one that you would say is deep. How can that influence how we organize ourselves? We got a project, and we allocate time for the coding people to do their part. And that might take a period of time for them to complete their work, right? And then we turn it over to the testing people.
One testing people.
Code cut off or code freeze or something like that, and then they do their thing for a while. Look familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's also known as waterfall. Right, now my very simple model with two different scales. It makes it clear.
Bring it back to one page.
You can have UX and architecture, right? You can have multiple stages here. In some organizations, this works fine. Nothing wrong with this in those organizations. But there are some possible delays and possible risks. Right? There's delays because you've got to run for a long period of time to get things done, so it's worth it for these people to get involved. And there's some risks because you might learn things when you get to here that you didn't know when you were here, and that might cause us to do some rework. But then you start hearing some comments from people as they're trying to deliver against that promised code cutoff. Comments like this. And comments like this. And comments like this. And like this. Yeah. For the second time. So so while these comments come about, sometimes that happens. And then what do you hear the testing people say? Great. Here we go again. Nights and weekends. And the programmers are going home at 5 o'clock. We're here trying to get this over the finish line. But now there's this new thing called Scrum. And Scrum is going to help us solve this problem. Because what I've been told is that we can work together as a team and together in short increments of time deliver things. So we've decided that we're going to create a 3-week iteration of time. And we're all excited when we go into building something during this 3-week period of time, and this is what happens.